Are you guys able to valet the car?
Oh, you would like to?
Yeah, I would love to. Can I just grab something from here? No more?
No more. I believe it's
Oh,
overnight.
it's not overnight. Okay, all right.
all right.
So I'm gonna go there then.
Like, how can you?
Is this, you don't go, do you go in from here? Oh yeah, you do, okay. We are at CALSA. It's a conference for education administrators and leaders here in California, and we're about to talk about AI in education, which is a very, very, very big topic right now because as schools begin to open in fall, this is something we're going to be dealing with. You all here, looking forward to this conversation. So my goal primarily here is to provide context and to provide some immediate tangible strategies and resources that you can take back to begin creating a culture that makes people safe and gives them the confidence and curiosity to actually have the conversation. One of the things that I recommend most is like this deck is designed twofold. It's designed to obviously give you knowledge and share some ideas here today, but it's also designed for you to take the materials, the questions, the resources, the ideas, and go back and have these same conversations with your team. I share the entire slide deck with you. I have a reading list for you, and I also have like an introduction to ChatGPT guide that you can share with your teams to really build their proficiency and how they're using the tools and give them some context for things like that. So anything you see here, just kind of relax, enjoy the conversation. I have an entire QR code with a folder that you can take with you when you leave here today, because I will preface this with, it's a complex conversation. And the reason I also say that is when you think about having these conversations with your team, allocating that time, we're so used to operating in 45 to 50-minute blocks. That's what we do for everything. It's hard to do this with this because people need time to process. They need time to unpack these ideas. And if you can give it to them, they have more agency and ownership of what it is that they do. And I want you to tell me, when thinking about your role, who do you want to be? And another way to think about this is, how do you want other people to describe you? But just to give you an idea of some of the qualities that people say, and if I was doing this with a team of people and I had a little bit more time, I would actually take the time to let everybody share these out loud. You have things like, I want to be a great listener. I want to be known as somebody who is engaged. I want to be known as somebody who is a visionary, a creative leader, somebody who's motivating, transformative, somebody who's compassionate, creative, innovative, kind. And the reason I love starting with this question is you'll notice for a lot of people, it really eases their anxiety around AI because all you hear echo through the room are the most human qualities. They're the things that we want to be able to do more of, but we often don't always have the time to really invest in how can I be as motivated as I can possibly be and show up in that way for people. And what's actually even more interesting is when we interview students and we ask them, what are some of the things you wish you had more of in school? What are some of the things that you wish your teachers did more of? The two words that come up over and over again for students is, I wish my teachers motivated me more, and I wish my teachers inspired me more. I don't mind doing the work, I don't mind doing this, but motivate me, inspire me, do these things for me. So it's very interesting, we hear these very similar ideas in both places. So my name is Sabba, and I began my career as a high school history teacher, so a lot of my presentations have a little bit of history in them. So I want to take you back just a little bit to really contextualize the technology and why we are where we are right now. So we do this a couple ways. Number one, I want you to think about students who today are in university. And if we think about these students, they have never known a world where they couldn't just get up and Google the answer to something. If we think about our students who are currently in high school, they have never known a world where they couldn't email somebody, right? So things like Google, things like email. They also are the first group of students who saw the beginnings of social media. When we think about our students who are in middle school, they have grown up in the age of social media. And this one's really, really important because it's so hard to even believe that we've had social media around us in our lives. If we think about Facebook, right? There was like MySpace, Friendster, things before. But if we think about things like Facebook 2006, it's been about 20 years almost since we've had social media. 2 decades. And I don't know if you saw the recent report by the Surgeon General where all of a sudden now, about 20 years later, you've decided maybe social media might be a problem. We should do something about it for mental health with our kids. 20 years later, we're deciding to do something now because now we're starting to see the effects of a generation that's grown up with these kinds of tools without having had any guidance. And then we think about our little elementary school learners who think that they can talk and swipe any piece of technology that they see, right? You know, like you see all the little ones being able to give commands to Google and Alexa and Siri and all these other technologies. And then you think about the kids who have been born in the year 2022, right? The year of ChatGPT, which is also the year my niece was born. I was actually a little bit late to the ChatGPT game because my niece was born in October, and I literally took the rest of the year off, and I was like, I'm gonna go hang out, you know, with her and spend time with them. But for my niece, when I think about her, ChatGPT, when she sees something like this, and she sees, you know, like this text being generated, the way this feels like magic to us is just going to be her normal, because she will never have known a world where you couldn't do something like this. And so this always reminds me of the quote from Arthur C. Clarke, where he says, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic unless it existed when you were born. So when I think about my niece and nephew, and I think about the way in which they interact with their world, the kind of skills they're going to need, and just the world they're going to grow up in, these tools and these technologies will not feel novel or new to us. To them, it will be the way electricity is to us, right? We're not surprised by the electricity in this room the way they are. And one of the other things that's really important to remember, I know right now we're so immersed in ChatGPT because it is sort of, you know, the most accessible tool that we have. But one of the things that's so important for many of you going into schools, in this fall especially, is being really aware of the tools that Google and Microsoft have as well, because those are more accessible, they're free. ChatGPT, a student still has to go to the browser, go and open it up. But with Google, which is what most schools use predominantly, it's going to pop up and be right there without anybody even wanting it or not. So I do want to give you a little bit of insight into some of the things that, you know, AI tools can do, and just what the future might look like when we think about people like my niece and my nephew. So I don't know if anyone's seen this, but this is one of my favorite videos. So when we think about technology that we're mostly used to, you know, we think about things like, you know, should we get iPads? Should we get Chromebooks? We always think about the technology we're going to bring into schools. But like you shared earlier, they already have access to this. These are not things that we're going to voluntarily, you know, go to a company and decide, should we have this, should we not have this? These are things that are going to start to just be embedded into the everyday tools that we're using day in and day out. So I am curious to kind of just hear from you, when you see that, what is maybe some of the first things that kind of come to your mind? Efficiency. Efficiency.
More time for pleasure.
More time for pleasure, right? Who doesn't want that? We all have those things, and more human things that we don't really get the chance to do. Anyone else? Things that immediately kind of come to mind for you?
That just made me think about my need to reframe questions.
Yes,
Because
yes,
what I want,
absolutely.
like, I would ask some of those questions.
Yes.
Per se. So
Yeah.
Mindset.
Absolutely. Just giving that human command, right? One of the things that I really think about when I look at this is there's no internet being used here, right? The way we're used to with ChatGPT, that kind of search, like bias, information, this and that. This is really working off of our documents, right? This is an ecosystem where your documents, so the number one thing that comes to my mind is how messy my files and folders are. Like if I can't name things and I don't know what things are called and whatnot, then how in the world can I command a technology to go and do these commands for me? So we are going to see a lot of these very basic skills around digital organization once again really come to the forefront and be really, really, really important. So the question that I think is really fascinating and interesting to ask is, what are the unintended consequences of not designing schools for a rapidly changing world? And for many of you, you're all leaders in this room, and one of my favorite leaders to turn to right now is Satya Nadella. Not so much even for the technology perspective, but just watching the way he talks about technology, the way he eases people, really, really great lines even that you can use as you again think about your teams. But one of the things that he says very gently is that while many people are shocked by AI, look at the evolution of technology. This is really just the next natural thing. We've had AI around us in so many places, but it's not really something that we were able to use ourselves in the way that we are now. It was running sort of, behind the scenes in many of our tools and things like that. But because there are so many things that we have not been able to adapt with, we're now sort of faced with this like urgency to now do a lot of the things that, could have been done a long time ago. Now, the reason to say that is not to paint some negative picture, but it's that AI is so powerful, we can actually make up for lost time if we implement some of the right strategies. So I always think back to when I graduated from school. So I graduated in 2007, and make a long story short, got a great job the first year. But what happened a couple months later was the Great Recession. And literally for the next 5 years, it was like layoff after layoff after layoff. It was like an absolute disaster. But one of the things that I look back and I think about now, when I think about sort of all these different technologies that emerged during that time, 2007 was also the year the iPhone came out. Airbnb was launched. So many other tools and technologies that are our norm today were launched during 2007. Yet here I was as a graduate from the University of California, Irvine with a bachelor's and a master's, clueless about how to interact in a world with technology. Clueless. And so when I look back now, knowing the research and knowing the things that I know, and I map the timeline of these technologies to emerging research. And this is not research behind closed doors. These are just this is like one of many different articles that was written about this time. The number one question that comes to my mind is, how did my professors not think to teach me about the world that I was walking into? And we don't want our graduates to feel that way, and we don't want our kids to feel that way. If you look all the way back to when tools like Google were coming out, you had researchers like Larry Cuban from Stanford and Tayek and Tobin talking about, we need to change the fundamental grammar of school, right? We can't be teaching people in silos or content in silos. You move forward, and the reason I highlight these papers for you is because they're so relevant today, even though they're so old. If you look to this one, in the 2004, this was written by Paul Atwell in 2001. He said, we don't just have a digital divide, we have a digital use divide. We can't just give kids technology, we have to change the tasks that we're doing with that technology. In 2001. Then you come to this one, Dancing with Robots. If you take any of these papers, the number one I recommend you take is Dancing with Robots, was written by Frank Levy from MIT and Richard Murnane from Harvard. And what they said was, when AI comes, like this day that we're living right now, 2 skills people need. Being able to solve unstructured problems to which there are no answers, right? You have to figure it out yourself. ChatGPT can give you a lot of answers to like 1 + 1 and a lot of other great things, but it can't tell you how to create an AI plan for your school district, right? It needs your human insight. It needs your knowledge, your insights, your intuitions about what's going to help make that happen. Sure, it can help you craft that narrative, but it can't, boom, bust out that plan for you. Number 2, engaging in complex communication. And if you think about the world we live in today, we have no shortage of unstructured problems, and we can't communicate with each other about any of them, right? Like right at the beginning, I was, talking about we have this thing and we want to do this, but my board says this, and oh, we want this and we want this. Like the politics and the divide over communication is so intense because these are the 2 skills that we need the most that unfortunately AI cannot do for us. And then of course there's my absolute favorite, the Future of Jobs report, right? How many times have we seen, these are the trending skills, these are the new skills kids are going to need. And like I said, this is just a handful of papers that we have had over the years. So we begin thinking about okay, it's not really knowledge that we're lacking, right? What are the things we really need? And then you think about AI, and you think about this very moment that we're in right now. Raymond Kurzweil predicted almost to a T that in 2023, right, the computer will surpass the power of a human brain. If you go a little bit further, he says by 2045, it's going to surpass or be the equivalent of multiple human brains. People say that time could come sooner, who knows? But you know, these things, this research, this information is there. And when we think about how we measure knowledge, right? Mostly for students in terms of assessments, the computer has now shown that it can do all of this probably better than most kids can, right? Most of us can if we're not studying these things. So what makes this so significant? Because I think this is another really important point to be a little bit delicate about when having conversations with our teams as well. We've heard the promise of technology, we've heard the promise of efficiency, we've heard all these promises before, but if you think about it, sometimes it feels like we do more work now than we ever did before with notifications, emails, and all these things. So here's a couple things that make this moment significantly different from previous ones. This is the first time with a technology that every single generation is simultaneously being impacted. If your schools are having conversations and doing professional development around AI and what that means, so are their parents, right? Their workplaces are having these conversations. They're also having trainings about AI and what it means in their respective industries. So whereas before you didn't have parents maybe come to you and say, why aren't my children using iPads? And you know, it was the opposite problem, right? It was like, get them off the iPads. I want them doing highlighting. I want them doing notes. Like I remember when we first introduced iPads, parents wanted them off the technology, not on it, because they couldn't understand what was happening. But now in workplaces, parents are having to deal with these same technologies the same way kids are, the same way we are, me, you, everyone. Even my dad the other day came to me and said, I heard you can ask ChatGPT this question. Can you search this for me? So every single generation is feeling this in three ways: how they live, how they learn, and how they work. And so it really then presents us with an opportunity. Like I said, it's not just in ChatGPT. This is a quick example of what Microsoft looks like. This is actually just the browser. This is not even the Microsoft tool. This is just using the free Microsoft Edge browser. Microsoft has a few things. Bing with chat, you know, working very similarly to ChatGPT, but it's also got a compose button right next to it. I have a Microsoft Word doc up here. You could pull a Google Doc up here. You could pull anything up here. This is just the Microsoft Edge browser. When your students open up Google Docs, this is the little like prompt thing that now comes up. And I don't have the video here, but this basically is not a static prompt. It's a flashing set of prompts while your Google Doc is open, giving you all these really good ideas. And I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't even know I could do that. So not only is it like I'm seeking this out as a learner or even as an adult, if this is something coming to me, asking me what questions and things I have. This is a really fascinating thing, and I'm sure this is the experience of many people. TKS is one of my favorite organizations. If you haven't seen it, it's called the Knowledge Society. It's basically an accelerator for high school students, a 10-month program they can enroll in. But they recently opened up their new application cycle. And it's a little bit hard to see here. You can see it when you get the slides. But basically, they have a question about, like, you know, a problem you'd like to solve, you know, in the world. And so these are all the same exact responses from kids that went in and utilized ChatGPT. Like, literally, they're exactly the same. And so, but I love his sentiment here. I don't think it's the students' fault. They likely haven't been taught how to use it. If we ban this in schools and we don't invest in curriculum to teach it, we're just going to see more of this problem. And then we think about our teachers, right? This is one of my favorite charts from McKinsey, because so many times when you ask people what their strategic initiatives are or like what they want to spend most of their time on, people say these things over here, right? When we think about the things that even we said here, I want to be more compassionate, motivational, inspirational, but coaching and advisement, about 4.5 hours. Social emotional learning is like probably people's like #1 initiative right now, but look at how much time the data says we actually get to spend investing in these areas. We may have invested in curriculum, but that actual human connection relationship, this is a minimal amount of time we are spending here. And so one of the biggest opportunities for us is how do we flip the script of this data, right? How do we get it to where a lot of these tasks that are just like more around efficiency and whatnot can be flipped, and we have more time to spend doing what it is that we do best, okay? One of my favorite ways to begin thinking about this is this sentiment right here. So a lot of the things that I'm going to share with you are actually not really new. I've been sort of researching this method called design thinking for about the past decade. And while a lot of people think AI is new, and it absolutely is, and tomorrow there's going to be something else, we so often think that only technology can cause disruption, but we've seen how quickly a pandemic can equally cause disruption. So a lot of these strategies that I'm going to share for you are not just for how do we deal with AI, It's how do we deal with the world that we live in now where change is just a constant. So in 2014, I had the pleasure of hearing Eric Brynjolfsson, and this is the last line of his book called The Second Machine Age, and it completely changed the way that I thought about technology and introduced me to a lot of strategies that I'm going to share with you today. But one of my favorite lines that he shares at the end of the book is that technology is not destiny. We shape our destiny. We give technology a lot of power, and we give it a lot of power because we don't have the strategies to be able to direct it and to guide it. And that's the most important thing that we need right now. I always remind people, at the end of the day, you have a vision for your school district. And it's so important right now to lean into that vision, to lean into your values that you have, and look at how you can use this technology to accelerate this work that you want to do. So one of the ways we do this is using a method called design thinking. What makes this method so unique is that it begins with empathy. And I always tell people, if you didn't do the entire process, but you just leaned into the empathy part and you decided to begin building those skills and you created your culture and community, and with those listening sessions, with these kinds of questions, you will solve 90% of your problems just through this. Most people's problems come through assumptions that are made, questions that are not asked, and people who don't feel seen and heard. This one initial phase clarifies for us so much of the confusion and allows us to focus in on the right problem we need to solve instead of the assumptions we make about the things we often need to do. But probably one of the most powerful things about this entire method, you're not just teaching people skills and steps, you're giving people a mindset to be able to embrace change. And this is probably the most important, because what do most people feel when it comes to change? Anxiety, fear. And the moment you're in that state, you can't do anything, whether it's technology, anything else, it doesn't matter. You cannot operate from that mindset. I first learned about design thinking, and I love pairing these two things together, because while I may have heard the sentiment from Eric Brynjolfsson and seen his book, it was actually listening to two first grade teachers talk about how they used it in their classroom that allowed me to change my practice. And I, at that time, was at USC in a med school program. I was the director of innovative learning at a med school program at USC. Completely different age gap, a different group of people, but the same method applies no matter what you do. So they had basically talked about how they had reframed a book activity. Instead of having the kids just read a book, they had the kids empathize with the character, they had them do all these different things. Basically, they had them go through the design thinking process. So when I first got access to ChatGPT, the first thing I did was, let me take a lesson I'm really familiar with, and let me see, can you do this? And so I said, hey, I'm an elementary school teacher, this is the book I want to do, I want to do this design thinking activity, and instantaneously it came out. And literally, if you had recorded the presentation or you go through that slide deck, it's almost word for word. The accuracy of it to be able to create design thinking experiences is absolutely incredible. And I've tried it with so many different things. And I'll tell you, the number one barrier that existed for most people with change, or people love design thinking. Like, you tell it to them, they do a design challenge, they do an experience, they love it. But I'm teaching fractions tomorrow. But my board needs to do this. But our strategic priority is this. And that ability to make that connection between how we use it in our current thing, no matter whether you're a teacher, an administrator, just an individual person, I don't want to say it was next to impossible, but took a lot of time that, quite frankly, most people just don't have. And once this does it for you, you know the most interesting thing I've observed? It's not that people take this and go apply it and copy and paste it. It sparks an idea within them. Oh, that's how you could do it? So you mean I could do this way? And now they've come up with their own idea within seconds just because somebody else generated and put something on that blank page for you. I was so fascinated by this concept and the school and teachers I had learned it from. I went back in 2017 and did a 3-year research study. We need to get deeper. What are the things that actually allowed you to do this? Because they were a public school, right? So when I was teaching, I was like, I was in a public school. I didn't get to collaborate in this way. How did you do this? So we came here, we gathered the data, we did this. There's a documentary that's linked for you in there as well that you can watch online. But this is what the results showed. These are the same, we mapped the design thinking skills, we mapped the design thinking methods and said, to what degree do you feel your students are proficient in these areas? And when we look at these skills, these are all the same kind of skills that you mentioned in the beginning. Creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, empathy, not just the skills, but also the mindsets, creative confidence. And so it really, really, really is such a powerful method, and it's powerful for a couple of reasons, but the primary one being, we need steps and structure, which sounds so contradictory to creativity, right? But the more structure and honestly more formulaic your methods are, the more creative capacity people have, because you have the guardrails in which they can operate to get from idea to impact and actually get to that execution part. Everybody has great ideas. Very few people can execute, and that's what design thinking helps you with. But it becomes even more important in the age of AI, because in the age of AI, when you look at the things that you do with design thinking, those are the things that humans do best. And so this is sort of like the new paradigm, really, of us to explore. What are the things that humans do best? What are the things that machines do best? And what does that co-collaboration look like with one another? Because right now, when we look at a lot of the things we do, machines are really great at doing them. They're really great at doing them, and we don't want to be spending our time doing those things, and we definitely don't want to have our kids spending their time doing those things. Things like design thinking, futures thinking, all these different ideas can be honestly very complicated for a lot of people. So this is a framework that we created. We have a course that we teach, and we have an entire professional development program called Speak AI, Stay Human. And it's built around 3 things, all evidence-based practices. The first one is dream your future. You can't integrate AI, and I will tell you, most people right now, if you look at what they're doing with AI, they're just they're substituting. Same thing we did with iPads, same thing we do with every technology. This is how we used to do it. Oh my God, it can do it better, and it can do it faster and prettier for me. But we don't actually change our practice, and we don't actually always do new things. So the first thing we have to do before we go to AI, what do we want? Who do we want to be as individuals and as organizations? We already have this defined, we just don't usually get to live it out. The second part is, how do we begin focusing in and actually framing our problems, articulating our problems, defining our problems, so that we can actually get to solving them? And that's where we have my favorite one, which is Spark. Spark is basically a prompt engineering method that we created that helps people talk to AI in a bit of a different way than they usually do. A lot of people still are so like, write this email or do this or act as an expert. But one of the most important things that you as a human do that AI can't do is understand the nuances of your environment, right? AI cannot, somebody asked me the other day, do you ever think AI will get to a place where it can empathize? Well, unless it can see and speak to the person in front of you without any communication, just being able to look at their body language, just being able to look at how they're interacting with other people, those things that we notice as educators, right, with our teams, with our students, unless a computer can get up and physically analyze those things, no. There are certain nuances that I know about something to design something that a computer doesn't know right now, but that's my sort of human advantage, right? So what does Spark do? Spark tells us to look at 5 areas when we're communicating with AI. The situation, right? Describe it out, in as much context as possible. I kind of say, if you imagine, when you're sitting down with your friend for coffee and you're going through this problem, you're venting away, that is the way you should talk to it, to give it that kind of information. What is the actual problem you're trying to face and solve? What is your aspiration? What is your dream outcome? What are the results you hope to see? And then the last one is what we call Kismet. It's basically designed to mirror human connection, and that's serendipity. You're sitting in a room, you say something, I say something, there's an aha moment. So we asked ChatGPT, tell me something I'm not thinking of. What am I missing here? Give me some ideas. What am I not thinking of that you might be able to tell me? So this is kind of the framework that we say, pretend like you're talking to a friend. This is what the guide goes through, but I want to show you just what a difference this makes to a teacher who's using ChatGPT, which many of them are going to, so let's at least use it well. If we just go in and say simply, create a 5th grade lesson plan about fractions, you'll see over here, we get a very, very, very basic response. It's going to do direct instruction. It's going to tell you to create some worksheets. Very, very basic. But when we go in with Spark, and I shortened it here, but basically, you go in, you tell it all the details, you begin to see right away, it's going to give you a completely different response. It's even going to talk to you in a different way. But because we really emphasized we want to enhance students' confidence and motivation and actually enjoying the math experience, you can see here it's coming up with everything from bingo to scavenger hunts. Oh, scavenger hunt, love that idea. Tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. And we can go and we can continue doing this. Even something simple like this prompt, how can teachers collaborate more? That's not a question, there's no information or insight there. It will give you a really fancy looking answer, but you start putting something like this in, the percent of something you want increased, the results you want to see, the outcomes that you're hoping for, now you're gonna get a completely different response. And these are all linked for you in the guide that I have. Even this is my pet peeve with prompts. I want you to act as an expert in. When something is pulling data from the internet, do you know how many people are self-proclaimed experts? We have to be able to define these things, know the authors, know the frameworks, and know all these different things. And so this can handle up to 4,000 characters, if you're using the free version, of text. So use all of it to tell it all the details that you have. This is another one of my favorites. I forgot to say earlier that question, who do you want to be, was inspired by the book Atomic Habits. But you can even tell it things like, I want you to act as my journal coach. I want you to use the methods in Atomic Habits and guide the questions that you ask me. And every single day it can ask you new questions, prompt you to think deeper. Again, when we think about, just things that we don't all have access to, how does this help us kind of do those things? In the deck, you'll see there's an example of ChatGPT that you can look at, but I also put in an example from Google Bard. Because again, your students are going to have access, so it's just good to know and see what they're going to have. With Bard, you can actually, at the very bottom with an answer, it says export to docs or put your draft into Gmail. And so if you export to docs, that's what it looks like, all with just a couple of clicks. But again, it's just important for people to be aware that there's so much more than ChatGPT out there as they begin the school year. So that was a lot. But like I said, I really hope this is a resource for you to be able to dig deeper. Everything is linked in here for you. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to chat with you. We are opening up our second cohort. We had an amazing first cohort. We definitely had some very early adopters in there. But we do have a course called the AI Bootcamp, where in about 4 weeks, we up-level you in all 3 of those areas of the framework, how to be able to help people think about the future, how to be able to define an actual problem, and then implement a solution. It is a mini project that you do, but what it does is it gives people the skills to be able to really think about these tools in a strategic way to be able to have a really successful integration in the fall. So if you're interested in that, let me know. We'd love to have you in there. But that is the QR code that you can scan. And like I said, every resource is in there. And I'm going to leave this up over here. So even at the end, if you can't, some QR code doesn't always come up right away. But if you want to come grab that, like I said, there's a reading list in there of just some of my favorite resources. If there's anything I've mentioned that you would like, let me know. And then that's about it. So